This morning I'm going to be reviewing the Fujifilm X-H1. This camera came out a few months ago, and I got it a few months ago. But I've been a little reluctant to do the review on this because I had some reservations about where it would fit into the scheme of things. I've finally kind of concluded what I believe. So first, let me discuss some facts about this. It has IBIS, in-body image stabilization. And I think that's kind of a big deal, especially when Fujifilm has some fantastic lenses without built-in image stabilization. So that makes those lenses much more useful, in my opinion. The lens I have mounted on this is the 18-135 zoom, and I have a couple of more lenses around me, including a 55-200, the 60 macro, and the 56 1.2, in addition to 35 1.4. So they have some very excellent lenses. As a matter of fact, one of the best thing about Fujifilm is probably their lenses. When I picked cameras, with either a Leica lens, a Zeiss lens, or a Fuji lens. And I think the Fuji lenses are right on par with the Leica and Zeiss lenses, and oftentimes a much better value. They are big, they are a little bit heavy, but if you're going to get a fast lens and a quality professional type lens, you can kind of expect that. So let me talk a little bit more about this system. It has all the dials, all the buttons, as you can see. It has a good selection of manual controls, and if you're a manual shooter, this is very important and very helpful. In addition, it has the aperture ring, and that makes it a lot more user-friendly for adjustment if you're coming from an environment where the DSLR environment where you're using aperture rings. So that's handy. In addition to that, unlike some of the newer DSLRs and a lot of mirrorless, this has a shutter speed ring on top, and this gives you the major increments. You can minor incrementally adjust it with the buttons on the back, the little dial things. So that's handy too, to get you right in on your exposure properly adjusted. It has very tactile controls. They're easy to use. They fall to hand where they should feel. They're easy to adjust. I have to say I like this camera because it's a lot more difficult to make mistakes. I find when I switch to the Sony, the Lumix, that I have more problems with setting the aperture adjustment, shutter speeds, because the dials are all over the place. They're different places and they're hard to find sometimes. So it takes me a little bit longer. This camera is definitely focused on pro-oriented shooters. This really isn't a particularly good choice for a non-professional shooter, an amateur shooter, unless you have some specific need or like of the specific controls that it has. There are far smaller, lighter, more compact cameras with similar amount of pixels and advanced processing technology similar to that of the Fujifilm. So this is an excellent switch over from a DSLR to the mirrorless camera system. Fujifilm is a much larger company than either Canon or Nikon, by Canon for a factor of 3 and Nikon a much larger factor than that, closer to 9. But Fujifilm is a big company. They aren't so much into consumer cameras as Nikon and Canon are. But if you've ever been to a sporting event, you as likely as not have seen a telephoto lens from the movie cameras, and it was built by Fujifilm. Now, as much as that sounds like it would put them in the video industry, this does have video, and it has 4K video, and it obviously is an attempt by Fujifilm to move into the video environment. I have to be candid with you. I don't think this is the best choice for video. APS-C is not my first choice for video. I would go with the Micro Four Thirds. It approximates the old 16 millimeter much better, and I'm not even going to get it. There's a lot of considerations, and unless you have a specific need for shallow depth of field or stylized movie making, I really think the Lumix GH system is much better than a lot of systems, including the Sony A7S series. So let me go on from that. Fuji has made this into a very large body, and I'm gonna compare quickly why I say it's a large body. This is the similar APS-C by Nikon. So this is the Nikon. This is the D7000 series. This is a 7100, but they're all similar. You can see the Nikon is a bit taller. It is not much narrower, but it is. But it's taller and it's thicker by a bit. And the controls on it aren't nearly as good. Now the lens on the Nikon is a 24-85, and you can see the 18-135 on the Fujifilm is a bit smaller, even though it has a much longer range, and it's a very similar speed, maybe even a tad faster. So there is a size advantage to the Fujifilm and the mirrorless systems. It's not huge, doesn't make a huge difference. The X-H1 is a little bit heavier than the Fujifilm X-T2 was. It's 673 grams versus the X-T2's 507. But it is made of 25% thicker magnesium for durability, so that's definitely consideration. And it has both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, as opposed to the X-T2's Wi-Fi only. The battery life is quoted at 310 instead of 340, so that's a minor disadvantage, although Fujifilm has provided a new battery to be used with the X-H1. So it should help just a little bit. Now, the other thing, I don't use touchscreens as a matter of course. I find them not very convenient. I'd rather use the wheels and buttons, but it does have a touch screen for those of you who use those. So although it doesn't articulate very much, it does have the touch screen. So that's a consideration. So the main advantages of the X-H1 versus the X-T2 are going to be the in-body image stabilization, the video, the 4K video with 200 megabits per second versus 100 megabits per second. It has a better autofocus algorithm, and it has an electronic front curtain. So those are some advantages. The disadvantage of the X-H1 is obviously the price. Its introductory price was $18.99. You can currently find the X-T2 for around $13.99. For your $500, is it worth the difference in the in-body image stabilization, the video features, the better autofocus algorithm, the front curtain? Some of the minor controls are a little bit, the thicker magnesium body. Is that worth $500 to you? Maybe, maybe not. It depends upon how you use it. So all in all, I do like this camera. I've gotten it out and used it a few times, much less than I expected I would use it. I have to admit that I think this is a niche camera. This is for pros. This camera is really designed for pros. This has outstanding quality optics for the price. I think far superior to most of the other competition. That said, I'm going to tell you what I use more than this camera, and that is my Sony. I have a Sony a6500. It came out with in-body image stabilization before the Fujifilm by quite some time. And the lens I have on this Sony is a 16-70 Zeiss lens. Now you can see the size difference of the two is substantial. The Sony is a lot smaller. If you're looking for a smaller, more compact camera, the Sony a6500 is an obvious choice. When you're talking about a price of $1899, I would also be reluctant not to include a comparison with the Sony A7 series. The A7 series, and I have a very small lens on this. It's an f2 a 28 millimeter lens. This again is a very similar size, maybe a tad smaller, and it's full frame. So if you need full frame, I would tend to go with this. The Fujifilm may be a better value depending upon how you use your final product for your images. If you're going to blow them up to a mural size, the full frame might have an advantage. It probably has a small advantage. But for anything less than a 24 by 30, I think the aps-c format's going to hold up very well, especially with the Fujifilm lenses and the processor and everything else. I see this camera being used almost exclusively by professionals. By the way, Fujifilm has an excellent firmware update program. A lot of times they'll introduce new features on new cameras, and they will actually make them so backward compatible that a previous generation camera is brought up to the specs of the new camera. That can save you a lot of money. And that has happened to me several times with the X-T1 and the X-T2. I no longer have the X-T1 because I bought this instead. But with some of the updates, the X-T1 had virtually all of the useful features that I valued of the X-T2. So I skipped buying the X-T2. The X-H1, with the introduction of the in-body image stabilization, was enough to get me to open up my wallet and spend the money for it. So, in conclusion, let me say I think this is a great camera. I think it's a very niche camera. It is for a pro or a aspiring pro. This is an outstanding camera. They're very durable. Unlike the Sony, the finish is extremely durable. They're very quality built. They're a little bit heavy, and because of the quality. So I would have to say I like this camera for the right user. For a occasional user, a non-pro user, maybe not so much. But certainly for a pro or an aspiring pro, this would be a good investment. And I don't think there's a better investment for lenses than the Fujifilm lenses. They're top quality lenses, very good value for the money, durable, and I think they'll always be useful no matter what body you put them on. So that's what I have to say about the Fujifilm X-H1. Try it, see how it feels to you, see how it shoots. I think it may be the choice for you if you're an aspiring pro or a pro who wants to switch over to the camera.